how in the do you have a YouTube channel about parenting when you're doing this to children?
Ruby came to the stark realization of the errors in her thinking patterns and subsequent actions.
Yeah, I realize now that tying the shit out of my son's feet, denying him food, and keeping him locked in a basement, weighted down by bricks. Now I realize now that was so wrong. I should never have done that.
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And he's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminally Reacts. Guess who I am? I am your personal board-certified criminal defense lawyer. Yeah, yours, and yours alone. And I am here with my Lucky Irish cufflinks. Today we're reacting to Ruby Franke. Remember her? She was the one that you probably don't want to have her watching your kids because she has a disdain for children. Anyway, so we've got our content genius that you know as Michael Rivers behind the camera, behind every idea that we have. And before we get to Ruby Franke's sentencing, now if you remember, she was a YouTube influencer talking about parenting and all this other shit. Turns out she got the world's worst mother award, and she's being sentenced for it. You can't make this shit up. How do you go online and you say you're the world's greatest parent, and all of a sudden you get whacked really fucking hard for child abuse? I mean, you can't make that up. But before we get to that, before we get to the sentencing of Ruby Franke, before we get to that, this is brought to you by eForms.com. eForms.com, very effective way to avoid high-priced guys like me. For example, let's say you have your grandmother in your basement, and she's trying to get out, and she gets out and commits all these crimes, which is, all these things I come from personal experiences with my grandma. Well, all of a sudden she needs a lawyer, she needs this, she needs that, and, she doesn't know how to do any of that, and maybe she's incompetent and needs a psychological evaluation. Anyway, so what do? You take care of her affairs, and you get control of her personal affairs by getting a power of attorney. And how do you do that? Well, you go to eForms.com. Or if you want to sell her four-wheeler or her crotch rocket, you go to eForms.com and you get a bill of sale. Or if you want to make sure that she's paying rent on time, which she never does, you make her sign a rental agreement. Where do you get that? eForms.com. So eForms.com, if you don't go there and you need it, you're going to regret it. So go to eForms.com. All right, so I'm going to tell you something. I do a lot of different types of criminal cases. Some that are worse than others. Some homicides, some drug cases, some whatever. It runs the gamut. White collar, dirty collar, whatever. One thing I hate more than any other type of case is anything to do with children. Anything to do with children. This is just horrific, honestly. So let's dive into sentencing. There's a couple of things that happen at sentencing. Well, in this case, she pled guilty to, I think, 4 different counts. And ostensibly, I'm sure they're one for each child. And when you have a victim crime that involves a real person, the judge can take each one of those cases and sentence them consecutively, meaning one after the other. Or they can sentence them concurrently. Generally, when you have victims like that, though, they stack them up because that's a way to account for each person. So let's just kind of dive in. It's not a super long video, but this is part of law and crime. So let's just check it out.
I want the court to know that through introspection and reflection, Ruby Franke has become a serious student of her own actions.
I would hope she would. Now, she's wearing, really lovely striped Louis Vuitton gown, graciously provided to her by the county. And, when you're standing there and you've got the tainted client, and when your client is guilty of hurting children, and this child abuse thing isn't just like she spanked a kid one time. This was like systematic abuse. It's difficult to stand in that lawyer's shoes.
Actions.
You're so precious to me. I'm sorry.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to District Court. We're here for sentencing in the matter of State of Utah versus Ruby Franke. Ms. Franke is here with Mr. Windward. Mr. Clark and Mr. Sham are here for the State of Utah. And we are ready to proceed with sentencing.
And you know, one of the reasons why a plea is better in some of these situations, and sometimes you have to plead guilty, but there's no deal on the table. And I suspect that's the deal here, except for they probably got rid of some counts. And because there's a thing called acceptance of responsibility that plays a big part in sentencing.
We are. Yes, Your Honor.
Counsel, the terms of the sentence were agreed to as part of the plea agreement, correct?
That is correct.
There is a pre-sentence.
When you have a plea agreement, generally speaking, everybody's bound by it. You know, so they can't get up to, unless you didn't comply with the PSI. In other words, comply with probation. Probation drafts a pre-sentence investigation, which is a document that probation creates for the judge to say, this is what the facts of the case, here are the parties, here's their history, here's their financial, you know, and here's the offense. And this is what we think, you know, the recommendations are. And we think she should get a psychological evaluation, she should do this, she should do that. But sometimes the judges aren't bound by the plea agreement. In most federal courts, the judge is not bound by the plea agreement.
There is a pre-sentence investigation report in the matter. I have reviewed that. Everyone has seen it.
Yes.
What about restitution, counsel, before we move on with other matters?
We'd like to leave that open at this time, Your Honor.
Restitution is money owed towards the victims. And in this case, they're her own kids. So she's supposed to care for them anyway. So how is there restitution? There probably shouldn't be any. But the prosecutor can actually have that. Don't decide on that now, Judge. If there's any in the future, we'll come back and make a motion.
I can get into that. I might be more comfortable if we approach to get into that.
Is there an agreement that restitution, that we reserve that and for what period of time?
And here's the other thing. A lot of times you have dual proceedings when it comes to children, because you will have not only the criminal case, but then you also have a CHIPS case, or Child Needed Protective Services. They call it different things, but in other words, they try to put some guardrails up on your parenting. And sometimes they actually move to terminate your parental rights. So that's something that can certainly happen. I don't know if it's happening here or not, but with this kind of systematic abuse, I'd be shocked if it wasn't part of the plan.
8 months is what we're anticipating. But I haven't talked to the defendant's counsel about that.
We haven't discussed that, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
No.
All right. What's the state's position regarding sentencing?
Your Honor, I'll stand up. The state respectfully requests that the court sentence Ms. Franke to consecutive prison terms for each of the 4 counts of aggravated child abuse.
So consecutive, remember what I said, consecutive versus concurrent? Concurrent means if you get sentenced on all 4 counts, let's say you get a year on all 4 of them, then you do only a year for each one of them, but at the same time. Consecutive, would mean you do 4 years. So let's see what he says.
This sentence was agreed to by Ms. Franke in her plea agreement and is also recommended by adult probation and parole. She committed horrible acts of child abuse. From May to August in 2023, Ms. Franke and her business partner held her 2 children, ages 9 and 11, turning 12, in a concentration camp-like setting. The children were...
How in the fuck do you have a YouTube channel about parenting when you're doing this to children? That's like an arsonist calling in the fire. I just don't understand how you can do that.
Regularly denied food, water, beds to sleep in, and virtually all forms of entertainment. They were isolated from others and were hidden when people came to visit the house where the children and the defendants were staying. The children were forced to do physical tasks like carrying loaded boxes up and down stairs and wall sits or sitting against a wall without a chair or stool for hours at a time. They were also forced to do manual labor outdoors in the extreme summer heat, at times without shoes or socks. They were forced to stand outside on a cement patio in the summer heat for hours and even days at a time. They were beaten and the 12-year-old was regularly bound hand and foot after he attempted to run away in mid-July. Both children had extensive physical injuries from the abuse that required hospitalization when they were found. The injuries from the binding to the 12-year-old are particularly awful. In addition to
Binding of your feet, binding of your hands, binding. I mean, just doesn't that sound, when it comes to children, doesn't binding just sound terrible? You know, I just hate anything bad happening to people in general. But when it happens to children, when torture happens to children, you know, they're the most vulnerable. And it's the most heinous thing, I think.
In addition to physical abuse, the children were emotionally abused to the extent that each believed, to some degree, that they deserved what was being done to them.
You know, my dad used to beat the fucking tar out of me. I mean, and it just didn't matter. I mean, if I didn't eat my coleslaw, he just grabbed me by the back of the hair and shoved it down my throat. Or backhand me at the table, or kick me down the hallway, or just smack me with a belt. I just have, you know, this whole business about you need to, you know, spare the rod, spoil the child's bullshit. You don't need to hit. Hitting teaches the wrong message, period.
Had the older of the children not had the courage to run away and ask a neighbor to call the police, heaven only knows how much longer he could have survived in that situation. After being caught
when you have children, they, you know, even if they're being abused, they don't have the skill set to realize that that person is doing them wrong. Or if they do, they don't have the courage to get beyond that person because they fear retaliation. And it's just, a child is helpless. You don't raise your fucking hand to a child. You don't need to.
Franke has shown considerable remorse, as evidenced by agreeing to serve consecutive prison terms and being willing to cooperate with the state against Miss Hildebrandt. However, given the severity of the abuse she inflicted, consecutive terms are appropriate in this case. As the court's aware, Section 76.3.401 lays out factors the court takes into account in determining whether consecutive or concurrent sentences should be imposed. Those factors are the gravity and circumstances of the offense, the number of victims, and the history, character, and rehabilitative needs of the defendant. As agreed to in the plea agreement and as recommended by adult probation and parole, consecutive sentences are appropriate. This is due to the severity of the abuse to both victims. It could be argued that Ms. Franke should receive a lesser sentence than Ms. Hildebrandt because of her remorse and willingness to cooperate with the state. However, the Board of Pardons and Parole will have broad latitude and will be able to take those facts into account when it determines how long each of the co-defendants will remain incarcerated.
So apparently, her co-defendant, Jessica Hildebrand, and this is a duo. That was how is this possible that they both could be systematically abusing their children and have this influencer channel about the proper way to treat children? I'm just aghast at this. So she got 4 consecutive sentences of 1 to 15 years. So that would be a minimum of 4 years and a maximum of 60 years. You know, I don't like indeterminate sentencing. That's, you know, a range, and because it's up to the Board of Pardons. And so I just don't think it gives the finality to the case that it deserves. But
in conclusion, we respectfully request that the court go along with what was agreed to in the plea agreement and is recommended by adult probation and parole and impose consecutive sentences.
Thank you. Anything else from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Winward?
Thank you, Your Honor.
so here's how it works. The state goes first. You know, they make their argument. And then if there's any victim impact, which they're not going to have in this case because they're children, and then the defense goes, and then there's a right of allocution. So she'll get the last word.
Good morning. In my few comments this morning, and in the comments my client wishes to make in a few minutes, we are not suggesting, nor are we asking that the court deviate from the stipulated sentence contained in the written plea agreement.
You can't do. I mean, you're bound by the plea agreement, so you can't do that.
I want the court to know that through introspection and reflection, Ruby Franke has become a serious student of her own actions. In the very early days of my involvement with Ruby, she was somewhat defensive, and she was still very much indoctrinated into a philosophy that was destructive. Fortunately, Ruby came to the stark realization of the errors in her thinking patterns and subsequent actions.
Yeah, I realize now that tying the shit out of my son's feet and denying him food and keeping him locked in a basement, weighted down by bricks. I don't know if she did that, but now I realize now that that was so wrong. I should never have done that. Really? How do you not know that in the fucking moment? That you just realized, since I've been behind bars, that what I did was wrong.
To say that she was horrified by this realization would be to put it mildly. I have marveled at how quickly Ruby abandoned her defensive stance and moved toward her total acceptance of her actions and to her sentence today. So far, she has used her time in jail to unwrap the layers upon layers of deceit and deception foisted upon her over the last 4 years by an unscrupulous individual. Ruby realizes that she still has work to do in shedding those thinking errors and to reestablish a better and correct pattern of thinking and behavior. Ruby realizes that changing her thinking, reestablishing relationships, and healing are not simple or easy tasks.
How about keeping her away from fucking kids? I guarantee you that's going to be part of her sentence.
However, she is committed to doing that work. I would like the court to know that Ruby Franke is a delightful, respectful, and responsible person.
You think everybody thinks that? I don't think so. But he's got an unenviable job. He's got to stand up there and say something good about his client and try to make the best argument he can for a lenient sentence.
She is open to feedback and addressing the consequences of her actions head on, and now ready to address your honor and accept your judgment. Thank you, Judge Walton.
Thank you. Ms. Franke has a statement she'd like to make.
She does.
Thank you. Judge Walt.
You don't have to bend down.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to make a statement without any intent to change my stipulated sentence.
I don't know why, honestly, you would even make any argument, because the stipulated sentence is what it is. It's not going to change. This is all for public consumption. And somebody who's, I guarantee you, once she gets out, she's going to be back on social media. She's going to be back on YouTube. How I survived prison, or blah, blah, blah. Give me a fucking break.
For the past 4 years, I've chosen to follow counsel and guidance that has led me into a dark delusion.
Counsel and guidance. That first, whenever you write a paragraph, what do they call that first sentence? Your thesis sentence tells you what the rest of you're going to read is all about. That tells me that she doesn't take responsibility. I was misled. It wasn't me. It was my alter ego. Give me a break. She's already deflecting in that very first sentence.
My distorted version of reality went largely unchecked, as I would isolate from anyone who challenged me. I was led to believe that this world was an evil place, filled with cops who control, hospitals that injure, government agencies that brainwash, church leaders who lie and lust, husbands who refuse to protect, and children who need abused.
It's everybody's fault but yours, Miss Franke.
My choice to believe and behave this paranoia culminated into criminal activity for which I stand before you today ready to take accountability. Jody Hildebrandt was never my business partner, nor was I ever employed by her. I have never received wages from her or connections. Jody was employed as my son's counselor in 2019, and in 2020 I paid her to be my mentor.
Why the fuck would you do that? See, this is all Miss Hildebrandt's fault, right? I have a mentor, and he's been my mentor for over 20 years. I got my first murder trial with him, and he guided me through a lot of things. He's an excellent husband, excellent father, excellent lawyer, excellent friend. You know how much I had to pay him to be my mentor? Nothing. This is just weird.
It is important to me to demonstrate my remorse and regret without blame. I take full accountability for my choices, and it is my preference that I serve a prison sentence. Thank you to the officers in Santa Clara and the Ivan City Police, Nick Hellman, Brian Palufo, Cy Pikuvit, Mike Pondoyo in Tobler, John Ward, D. Lewis, and Chief Flowers. You were the angels who came and saved my children. I spoke
From you. Fuck. Oh, you know, law enforcement intervention sometimes does save lives. It really does. You know, whether you're a drug addict and all of a sudden, you know, you get arrested and then you're forced to get clean, or in this case, you know, they rescue these children. So, you know, it's hard to listen to her allocution in a sense, because what if she never got caught? Would there be a dead child?
to thank Detective J. Bate. She plucked me out of a situation I didn't know how to get out of. And the moment she handcuffed me was the moment I gained my freedom. You were not the controlling ones. I was. Thank you to the medical staff at Intermountain Hospital. Your skill, tenderness, and professionalism helped heal my children. Jody and I inflicted the injuries, not the hospital. Thank you to DCFS, the Children's Justice Center, Judge Basil, and other key adults. You've gathered my children under your wing and offered them love, compassion, encouragement. You were not the ones who were doing the brainwashing.
Very articulate, you know, and if she's this articulate and this smart, because it sounds really good unless her lawyer wrote this, which I doubt it. We don't write most of these. Sometimes we do, but generally speaking, the allocution has got to come from the heart. It's got to come from the person within. And why couldn't she see that what she was doing was just dead wrong? You know?
Thank you to my Bishop Tom Hawks and my state president, Jim Nilsson, for reminding me of the Lord's love for the lost. So much pain and suffering would have been avoided had I followed and heeded your counsel.
Do you need to follow somebody's counsel to know you shouldn't beat the fuck out of children or torture them or deprive them of food or nourishment or water or just fun? You know, I saw some of those. Remember, we did a video a while back, so you should go back and look at what we did so you can get the full picture of what we're talking about here. It's just absolutely insane. It's just stupid.
And who was deceived, not you. Thank you to the Washington County Prosecutor's Office, Ryan Sham, the legal assistants and discovery clerks. Eric Clark, you exemplified to me
This isn't the Academy Awards. Why is she thanking everybody? This is just ridiculous.
how justice and mercy are meant to coexist. My charges are just. They offer safety to my family, accountability to the public, and they did show mercy to me. Thank you to my attorney, Lamar Winward, and his staff. I would not be where I am today without them. Thank you to Randy Kester for your limitless energy in healing my family. My dear friends, Pam and Roy, I'm so sorry for letting you down. Because of your association with me, your innocence was called into question. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, Kevin's family, my cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and neighbors, you all saw the warning signs long before I did, and you did what you could.
You know what I really don't hear? I mean, she's thanking everybody for what they're doing for her. But what you don't hear is, I'm really sorry for the awful treatment that I perpetuated on these children. What we hear is, oh, I didn't know, I was left under the guise of being brainwashed. And I've had all these people who have supported me, but you don't hear her talking about the offense itself.
You wanted to help, but I pushed you away. My mother and father, I have been utterly wretched to you. You have offered me unconditional love, and for that I have offered you unconditional contempt. My siblings and their spouses, because of my decision to roll around in a pigsty, I have dragged your families through the mud in public. Yet, when I desired to return as the prodigal sister, unlike the prodigal's brother in the Bible, you synced step with my parents and ran out to greet me. Your capacity to love is unprecedented. Kevin, my husband of more than 23 years, you are the love of my life.
How is he not complicit in this somehow? I mean, did he travel a lot and this only happened when he was gone? How did he not keep tabs on his own fucking children?
I'm so sorry to leave to you to finish what we both started together. The ending of our marriage is a tragedy. And you are wrapped around my heart.
These things are fucking hard to sit through, aren't they? I mean, listen to this, blubbering.
I'll be able to undo. To my babies, my 6 little chicks, you were part of me. I was the mama duck who was consistently watering you to safety. I can see now that over the past 4 years I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger.
See, she's not taking responsibility at all.
Launched into darkness knowingly. I was so disoriented.
If I'm a judge, a judge could kick a plea at any time. I don't know if the judge could necessarily kick a plea at this point, necessarily, but if he hears this kind of lack of her, I mean, she's got tears, she's sorry that she's in this position, but has she said anything about, look, what I did, I was a fucking monster to my children. I treated my parents like garbage, but I just don't get it.
But I believed dark was light and light was wrong. I would do anything in this world for you. My willingness to sacrifice all for you was masterfully manipulated into something very ugly. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good. I took...
At some point, it'd be nice if they had like a hook and then they play the music and then pull her off. Because, what she's doing right now isn't helping her at all. But when you're a narcissist, and I suspect that she's got to be a narcissist for not, for in the moment not being able to see what's... One of the classic characteristics of a narcissist is the lack of empathy for others. And she doesn't sound like... I mean, she's crying because she misses her babies. And, it led us away from the darkness. Or away from the light into the darkness. It's just bullshit.
Your mother. How terrifying this must have been for you. I will stop crying. You're hurting your tender souls. You're so precious to me. I'm sorry.
Children are precious. They're absolutely precious. And guess what? Their childhoods are fleeting. And so, they'll become adults. And the last thing you want is for your children to look at you with disdain of the way that you treated them as children. And to squander that opportunity to heavily bond with a child is such a waste. And this is just absolute waste.
My choice to live in fear of the world has created a great vulnerability and a blind spot for me, where I have broken hearts and I've caused people to suffer and I have betrayed sacred trust. watching my community respond to my charges with justice and mercy and grace and love is all the more evidence to me how wrong I've been.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Ruby Franke show. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You know, this should have been very short. This should have just been, you know, I was awful to my children. I am so sorry. I was misguided in everything I thought, and there's no excuse. This should have been, and maybe a little bit more apologies.
This world is full of really good people. And finally, I'm sorry for twisting God's word and distorting his doctrines. My greatest desire is to stand in his court someday spotless and confident. And Judge Walton, I know that standing before you today is a necessary step towards that end. Thank you to you and your staff for facilitating my opportunity to take accountability and to answer for my charges. I am humbled and willing to serve a prison sentence as long as it takes to continue unraveling all of the misinformation I have believed and bought, swallowed, and acted out, and for my family to heal and for the community to heal. And I understand this is going to take time. I'm committed to continuing my learning until all of my toxic layers are shed, and I am ready to re-enter as a contributing member of our beautiful society. Thank you, Judge Walton.
Thank you for your statement, Ms. Franke. Anything else, Mr. Winward?
No, Your Honor.
Anything else prior to the court imposing sentence?
No, Your Honor.
The sentence will be that Ms. Franke serve 4 counts, 4.
So, once the judge decides to sentence, you know, he'll pronounce the sentence, and sometimes they give a lecture afterwards, especially in difficult cases. Because guess what? Judges are elected, and political animals, too.
1 to 15-year sentence is based on her convictions for 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. Again, they will be served consecutively pursuant to the parties' agreement.
So that means she does a minimum of 4 years, and with credit for good time, you know, probably 3 years.
And the applicable statute, under the applicable statute, the court finds that that consecutive sentences are appropriate. Ms. Franke, the last thing I do need to tell you is that you have only 30 days to file or to perfect an appeal of any errors of the court by filing a written notice of appeal with the clerk of the court. If you don't do that within 30 days, you will lose your right to appeal. You also have the right to the assistance of an attorney on appeal and to have one appointed if you cannot afford to hire your own. Restitution, as agreed by the parties, will remain open for a period of 8 months. Any of the parties can bring that matter back before the court within that period of time. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Having a child is such a precious gift. You know, my dad, like I told you, used to beat the tar out of me. And, you know, a lot of times that trickles down, right? You know, like I would beat my kids. I didn't. You know, I didn't implore corporal punishment. Never had to. Words alone are enough. And if you lose your cool with your kids, guess what? They'll still be there. Those scars, though, almost never heal. You know, they get scabs, and then they get, you know, they may look healed over, but as a kid, you certainly remember when your parents treated you harshly or did something to you that you thought was disrespectful, and you don't have any recourse as a child. You don't have the ability to stand up for yourself with a parent, because guess what? They're the last line. So you go to your fucking room, you know, get down in the basement, get in that box, whatever, you know. I mean, I know somebody that their parents, you know, at 4 years old, put them in a box. I mean, who does that? Who does that to children? Nobody. And this whole thing with Ruby Franke is compounded by the fact that she came off as an expert, or a YouTube influencer on how to raise a family and how to be a parent. We saw some of those videos. These are very, very difficult cases to handle, from a criminal defense standpoint, because, you don't have any defense. So as you sit there and parent your child and you pat their head and maybe read them a poem or a story before they go to bed, look at that child and let them know how precious they are, how special they are, and love that child. Don't get yourself anywhere close to this shit. Not to mention the fact you're going to prison. I can't go on and on enough about what a gift children are. And if you're not getting along with your child, figure out how to get along. It's not that hard. So make sure you subscribe, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, sign up for Patreon, and we'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts. Hug your child. Give him a kiss.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away.
23-hour lockdown, please, is that my God?